We begin with a moment from the past between our protagonist, Jin Mori, and his grandfather. He makes a promise about friendships, but it was just a dream. Jin is a normal guy, and he wakes up late, so he goes flying on his little bike, almost running over an old lady along the way. The God of Highschool, in this case, is a very popular tournament, and everyone is eager to watch it, as the whole city is talking about it. We then see a guy who was working the night shift before the preliminaries. When he leaves work, he says he's going to have to take more shifts to earn more money. We also see a girl who is lost and asks some judokas to show her where the arena is. She says that the guy's muscles are beautiful, and they strike a pose, showing off. Meanwhile, the protagonist is speeding on his bike but has to stop to help a cute old lady who was robbed by a guy on a motorcycle. He starts chasing the guy with all his might, but ends up crashing into the girl who was watching the guys posing for her and breaks her glasses, making her knock him down. But at the same moment, she understands the situation and helps him. So, there they are, the two of them on a bike chasing a guy on a motorcycle. The chase continues, with the girl throwing punches left and right. She even helps by sticking her sword into the ground to make a sharp turn, scaring the motorcyclist, who speeds up even more. With the protagonist and the sword-wielding girl already frustrated, the motorcyclist throws the money away. The protagonist slams on the brakes, and the girl makes a huge leap toward the thief. When she finally unleashes an aerial sword technique, a sign interrupts the move, and she slams into the sign with just her skull, leaving a dumbfounded expression. When the thief loses his focus and looks at the damage, in slow motion, a punch comes flying at his face, knocking him off the motorcycle and raising a cloud of dust where he lands. The guy who threw the punch was the same one who was working the night shift to earn money, impressing both the protagonist and the girl. After that, a guy with a big nose, Luciano Huck, is introduced at the God of Highschool, where the three had gone. They start arguing about the thief, and the protagonist introduces himself to Daewi and the girl, who is Mira. The tournament is presented, where anything goes, and victory is achieved by knockout or submission. It's mentioned that regional tournaments are already taking place all over Korea to decide the participants for the main tournament. The introduction of all the Seoul competitors begins. Next, they show the bracelets that monitor the vital signs of the competitors, which they can only have because of nanomachines implanted in their blood. After the simple presentation, the Battle Royale-style fight begins, where everyone has to fight everyone. Two random competitors start fighting, and the competition kicks off, with each one hunting weaker opponents to crush. Different fighters quickly clear out the areas where they are, like the protagonist, Mira, and Han. In the background, the observers keep an eye on the competitors who are standing out. In the meantime, a completely different guy shows up, with a somewhat crazy demeanor, beating up several opponents as soon as he arrives and teasing the sword girl. He demonstrates his resilience by taking a kick, and the protagonist, understanding the enemy's strength, begins an interesting fight between the two. They exchange powerful blows, and the episode ends with this battle. It starts with a specialized team analyzing the attack that occurred on the island in the previous episode, where a guy in a suit appears, intimidating everyone. Meanwhile, two agents talk about their apparent boss. On their way home, the protagonist and the sword girl discover they live in the same direction. During the conversation, the girl is called a gorilla by him because she is really strong. Meanwhile, Han analyzes how powerful the regeneration provided by the nanomachines implanted in their blood is, as it doesn't even let the protagonist's neck break, despite Mira having snapped it when attacking with her sword. Each one goes home, talking about their goals. Han fights to earn money, Mira fights for her family's dojo, and the protagonist drops her sword, which looks completely different when it falls. A flashback of hers shows how important the sword is, as it was a heritage gift from her father. The three help each other find the sword in the river. The next day, they all gather again at the tournament arena, where the God of Highschool preliminaries will take place. While everyone is focused, the protagonist is peacefully taking a nap in the waiting room. The reflex test starts with the crazy guy in boxers and Gamdo, and then the battles begin. The sword girl quickly defeats her opponent, advancing to the next round. The protagonist also wins immediately, while fighter Mizion uses a Zangief-style move and wins. In the next fight, the nerd with a baseball bat easily wins, and Han's fight is no different. The protagonist watches and starts figuring out who his next opponent will be. Gon Gamdo goes to thank the protagonist and is already leaving the waiting room to fight against the ex-convict. Both start the fight, demonstrating their combat techniques. Gon Gamdo lands clean sequences of strikes on the long-haired guy, but before he loses for being out of the ring, the long-haired guy returns before time runs out and kicks his opponent in the face. The ex-convict starts taking the fight seriously, returning several punches and pulling his opponent's hair. When he grabs the guy, he strikes his heel against the Taekwondo master's face, who calmly takes the beating and tries to retaliate, but without success. Gamdo starts getting humiliated with multiple slaps, being forced to apologize. A flashback shows the long-haired guy doing the same to someone else, and he starts a sequence of strong hits and kicks on Gamdo until he leaves him completely battered. The protagonist, irritated by the long-haired guy's style, enters the arena and, with a powerful kick, sends the ex-convict to the other side of the arena. At the same moment, 4 agents come to contain the situation. In a quick sequence, the long-haired guy tries to fight back, and a flashback shows the reason for his anger, a woman humiliating him. After threatening to send everyone to hell, he tries a pure darkness attack toward the protagonist, who flies at him, returning the kick and following up with a triple kick combo, slamming him against the ground. However, the long-haired guy is unable to get up, as the same guy in the suit from the beginning, Gene Park, appears again in an intimidating manner. He introduces himself as the chief administrator of the tournament and says the protagonist will be punished for interfering in a fight. Thus, the protagonist is taken away with a smile on his face, completely calm. We start by seeing a crazy cult listening to the tournament on the radio and praying to Jabberwocky. Shortly after, we see Gon Gamdo in the hospital, all messed up, clearly in no condition to fight, and therefore, he's eliminated from the tournament. Kong Mansiok was so scared that he couldn't fight anymore. Our protagonist, Jin Mori, was almost eliminated for breaking the rules, but he wasn't expelled. In the next scene, we see the fight between Mira and Mizion. It was a well-balanced fight. Sometimes Mira took hits, and sometimes Mizion did. What motivates Mizion is, men of all kinds. Her dream is to have a harem. Mizion shows great superiority, easily enduring Mira's attacks. However, after taking a good beating, Mira begins to show her true abilities and defeats Mizion with just a few strikes, even without her sword. Right after Mira's victory, the fight committee goes to talk to the protagonist to present the punishment he would receive. The punishment is that he must fight the green-haired agent, decided as the best punishment for someone who loves to fight. On his way home, the commissioner gives Jin Mori some fruits to recover well for the next day's fight. However, that fruit wasn't just any fruit. After eating it, Jin Mori seems to be poisoned, starts coughing up blood, and ends up passing out. Right after that, we see Han Daewi getting motivated for his fight against Baek Sungchul. Baek seems to predict all of Han's attacks, but even that isn't enough. Baek shows that he can adapt quickly, but Han keeps taking hits and needs to have a flashback to stop getting beaten and remember that he wasn't weak. From there, the fight becomes more intense. Han demonstrates destructive strength and precision in his strikes, giving his opponent no chances and knocking him down without using all his techniques, winning the battle. We then see Jin Mori on the ground, still unconscious and late for his fight, showing that he was out for a long time. After having some strange visions, he wakes up and runs so he won't miss the fight, managing to arrive just in time. The fight's rules were that Jin Mori only needed to knock the commissioner down once to win. He wins the moment the fight starts. The audience is shocked that the fight ended so quickly, but then he hits the commissioner again, showing that he didn't win by chance. However, the commissioner doesn't seem satisfied, and something strange comes out of his body, resembling a clown spirit, and almost kills Jin Mori. But he's stopped by the committee team, and Jin Mori is declared the winner. Apparently, that poison fruit was some kind of test to see if he really was related to Jin Tae-jin. We start by seeing the fighters we already know and showing the protagonist, Jin Mori, totally excited, talking with his friends. Suddenly, a car stops in front of them, and a crazy guy gets out and asks Mira to marry him, out of nowhere. Next, we see Mira looking at wedding dresses with her cousin, and we meet the great suitor, Seonjin, a very wealthy fighter. We get a glimpse of Mira's past. Seonjin had already proposed to her in the past, promising that with his fame, he would make the moonlight sword style famous again and revive her family's fighting style. Her uncle was a very bad swordsman, and because of that, the family dojo lost students, leading the moonlight sword style to failure. As a result, the heiress, Mira, bore the weight of reviving her clan. Jin Mori tries to talk to Mira so that she doesn't quit the tournament because of the wedding, but he ends up getting rejected. Even so, he stays worried and discusses the situation with Han. In the next scene, we see Mira, all elegant, ready for the wedding. The father asks the groom to call off the wedding, as she's not marrying for love but to save her family's legacy. However, Mira insists she wants to go through with the marriage. Jin Mori shows up trying to save Mira, but the security guards stop him, and the ceremony continues. We then discover Seonjin's true intentions. He's part of the cult that appeared at the beginning of episode 3, and Mira is the key to one of their plans. We return to Jin Mori and the guards, and Han shows up as a gatecrasher, taking care of the guards in no time. A fight begins between Seonjin and the two goofballs. Han fights Seonjin while Mori gives an inspiring speech to Mira. After some heartfelt words and a few flashbacks, Mira decides to call off the wedding, but Seonjin doesn't give up the fight so easily. He summons what seems to be a samurai Susanoo, but even so, he's no match for Mira, who, with elegance, defeats him with a single blow, still dressed in her wedding gown. After this emotional story, Han receives terrible news. His best friend is gravely injured, which sends him into a state of extreme stress. He ends up beating up some people who made jokes about his friend. Finally, the fight between Han and Mira takes place. Despite being friends, due to his stressed-out state, Han is destroying Mira. Even after the fight ends, the referee has to separate the two to prevent Han from continuing. The fight ends with Mira bleeding on the ground, and Han walking away, depressed. He meets the protagonist and tells him that he'll see him in the finals. We begin with a flashback of Han, showing how he was during his teenage years. Then we cut to the present, with him vomiting in the bathroom, thinking about his friend who's dying and remembering what he did to Mira, his friend. As soon as the last match of the semi-finals starts, it's the protagonist against Byun Jae-hee, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter. Look at the anime representing Brazilians here, huh? Without much difficulty, the protagonist wins with just a few moves, showing his absurd strength. After the fight, the protagonist talks to Mira, who doesn't seem to be in bad shape. Thanks to the nanomachines, she was able to quickly recover from a severe neck injury. She advises Mori not to worry too much about the details and overthink things. After all, thoughts won't help him win the battle. In the next scene, we see Han visiting his friend in the hospital, where his friend's critical condition appears to have slightly improved, but it's still not enough. Now for the most exciting part, the final battle. We see the two friends' entrances, but are they now rivals? The battle starts even before they enter the ring, with some not-so-friendly glances exchanged. Then the fight officially begins, with Mori trying to land a flying kick and Han dodging. It's a very balanced fight, with both delivering many strikes and dodging many as well. However, Han seems to have more precise and refined techniques than Mori, putting him at a disadvantage. After remembering what happened to his friend, Mori uses his technique, Re-Taekwondo, triple kick. He sends Han flying with this move. But after delivering the blow, Mori reaches out a hand for Han to get up. Han reveals what he truly feels: "I never considered you my friends." Then he strikes a treacherous blow to Mori, even using his secret technique. After the shocking blow, we cut to Mira in the hospital, already walking around calmly. She sees a woman crying next to a stretcher and several people standing at the room's door. She's shocked to discover that Han's friend had just passed away. We return to Han and Mori's fight, where Han is using a sequence of special moves. We learn the reason why he's so desperate to win. He was promised that if he won the tournament, his best friend would be treated with the nanomachines and could finally recover. That's why Han is fighting so aggressively, regardless of who his opponent is. He uses his ultimate stance, Blue Dragon, and knocks Mori down. However, the commissioner approaches him and, in the final second before the fight ends, gives him the terrible news: your friend just took his last breath. But, at the last second before the match is over, Mori gets back up. We see a flashback of Mori from his school days, where Han is cornered by several guys, but Sungti, his friend, comes to help him. After taking a beating together, they talk, and Sungti gives a great piece of advice. He tells Han to trust in his friends, and then people will trust him in return. The flashback ends with Mori returning to reality, fighting Han but without the will to fight, completely on the defensive. We find out that Han's friend didn't actually die. The machines were just turned off because the commissioner wanted to test Han's limits. Han was almost giving up, about to take the final blow, when Mira appears, calling him to the side of the arena with a letter, which contains Sungti's final words. After reading the letter, Han regains his spirit. We see a next-level fight, with the arena practically exploding. Even the animation changes to focus solely on their fight. Each one shows off their special techniques, but in the end, the winner of the tournament is the protagonist, in a very close battle. In the end, the friendship between the three is restored, and we see them walking out of the arena, happy despite everything. In a dark forest, we see a brief conversation between a hooded figure and the protagonist's grandfather, but the scene is short, and we quickly cut to the protagonist's room, where he arrives exhausted and looks at a picture of his grandfather, wondering what the old man might be up to. A live stream begins with a special appearance by the commissioners, the green-haired one and the black albino one. They discuss the progress of the tournament, and the green-haired commissioner explains that the national tournament will be a team battle event, ending the live stream with more smoke than flow. Next, we see a battle in the arena between Mira and the Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter. Before he can even react, Mira swiftly ends the fight with a single strike. The protagonist wastes no time and starts yelling like a madman that the three of them will go to nationals together, leaving everyone embarrassed. The tournament administrator begins evaluating the participants with the commissioner team, explaining that the team battles were organized due to the large number of strong competitors in the regional rounds. The goal is to increase the intensity and adrenaline of the battles, setting them on fire. After the battle, the protagonist and his two friends start heading home, talking about how they'll be a team in the next phase of the tournament. They also discuss their goals. The protagonist wants to become stronger, your typical Goku, showing how childish his goal is, just because it's cool. At that moment, an old man walks past him, giving him chills. The old man disappears quickly, and soon after, we see the old man talking to the administrator. He delivers a swift blow to the administrator, making him vanish like smoke, revealing he was a clone. The bearded old man shows off his strength and calls the administrator his disciple. He apparently knows the protagonist and his grandfather, analyzing the protagonist and commenting that he ate the sage's fruit and still remains strong. They discuss the protagonist's grandfather, Tae-jin, who appears, having destroyed all the vegetation around him. The Jabberwoka worshippers also enter the scene, launching a powerful strike with a giant sword against the protagonist's grandfather. It's unclear if he survived or not. Then, we see Mira reflecting after the battles. At the market, she runs into the tournament presenter, who now reveals that he's blind and has a baby. Han, meanwhile, is talking to the administrator about continuing in the tournament. He decides to continue because of the protagonist and asks about the mysterious powers he's seeing in the tournament. Meanwhile, the protagonist is wearing a Bruce Lee outfit for training but ends up not being able to train due to distractions. He grabs a balloon that a random kid got from his supposedly dead grandmother, who's actually alive. The protagonist is just imagining things, and ends up twisting his ankle, which hurts even more when the bearded old man shows up, poking at him. The tournament presenter shows his admiration for Mira, helping her think in a different way. With his help, he leaves with his family, who stop along the way to face an assassin from the Jabberwoka cult. We return to Han, who's learning more about Cheriok, almost like a Hadouken, through the tournament owner's explanations. We meet two different characters, one with long, serious blue hair and a generic-looking boy, who briefly show off their strength. Then, two goofy-looking brothers appear, along with a red-haired girl and a guy who wants to live up to his grandfather's reputation. The six are introduced, each totally different from the other, but each holding a card in hand. Han and Mira go to the protagonist's house, where he explains a bit of his past and helps Mira with a sore shoulder. Han talks about the gods who will be present in the Nationals, making the protagonist even more excited. In the style of the King of Fighters, each team will consist of 3 participants, and a new presenter takes over the role. Unfortunately, Shin, the blind man, was killed, and the same assassin also murdered the green-haired commissioner, making the situation even more grim. The first battle will be between the Soul Trio, consisting of Mira, the protagonist, Prota, and Han, against the North Chungcheong team. The battle will be fought in individual matches. The first fight is between Mori and Na Jaidong, a fighter with a blonde pompadour. Mori starts by threatening with new moves and pressing pressure points but ends up pressing the wrong points, locking his own body and giving his opponent complete freedom, losing the first match in a ridiculous manner. In the next scene, we see the green-haired commissioner in a brief fight. He has a large wound on his abdomen but demonstrates his true power, shattering the power meter and easily defeating his opponent by cutting off his limbs. In the second match, Han Daewi faces Jin Kwang, a fighter who is 38 years old and still in high school, making him the oldest in the tournament. Jin showcases skills with a style called Du Proletario, but despite the ridiculous name, he lands some good hits on Han. However, Han is not easy to beat. After receiving a blow from Han, Jin uses flashbacks to try to turn the fight around, landing a solid hit on Han. Nevertheless, Han easily recovers and uses his Azure Dragon technique to defeat his opponent with a single blow. We return to the commissioner, who is almost finishing off his opponent, who has the ability to regenerate. 2 people appear to intervene with the commissioner. They are members of Nox, the crazy organization we saw in previous episodes. Now, we move on to the third and final fight of the Soul team, between Ymira and Jang Jangmi. Both are skilled swordsmen, but Ymira shows greater skill, managing to hit Jang and even destroy her sword. We return to the commissioner's fight, which is full of powers. The green-haired commissioner receives help from another commissioner who summons a giant dragon. It's a battle full of different and interesting powers. Back to the sword fight, Jang Jangmi summons a giant light sword and tries an attack, but Mira easily dodges it. Using a technique from her fighting style, Mira destroys the light sword and wins the fight with a single attack. In the commissioner's battle, the fight seems balanced, but the commissioners win using terrifying techniques, forcing the Nox members to flee. The opponent with the regeneration ability tries to explode himself like a suicide bomber to take the commissioners with him. We return to the Soul Trio, who are celebrating their team's victory. The next match will be between Gyeongsang South and Jiala North, Jegal Take vs John Jugok. The fight ends quickly and is very bloody, showcasing Jugok's terrifying abilities. He summons a shark and nearly kills his opponent violently. A nurse enters to try to help but is easily defeated by Jugok, who continues to beat her on the ground. Unable to watch the scene, Han steps in to stop Jugok, but a commissioner intervenes. At this moment, John, the opponent who had been beaten, rises and launches a lightning ability at Jugok. However, Jugok doesn't even feel the blow and continues to beat on John, causing him to scream in agony. We begin with John being operated on, completely disfigured after the beating he took from Jugok. Despite everything he did, Jugok was not disqualified from the tournament as they wanted to see how far his power would go. After the opening, we return to the tournament with some extras fighting. The Jiala South team appears to be quite strong, and their fighter quickly defeats a man 3 times her size. We also see that Han has been suspended from fighting for getting involved in Jugok's match. Back to the fight, we see a fighter with a tiger symbol on his back, showcasing great technique with the martial art called Taekyon. Despite his opponent's resistance, fighter Park Ilpio wins with relative ease. Mori recognizes that the tiger symbol on Ilpio's outfit is the same as the one on his grandfather's military uniform. Next, there is a brief explanation of Chariok, a power granted by the gods. Jin Mori comments that he doesn't need this attack. Afterward, we see a conversation between Jin Mori and Ilpio, which turns into a fight. Ilpio demonstrates some very strange moves, but the fight is balanced. However, it was just a test for Ilpio. After a brief conversation, Mori asks about the symbol on Ilpio's back, and he responds that it is a symbol of respect for Jin Tae-jin, Jin Mori's grandfather. We see a flashback from 14 years ago, showing Ilpio's father's funeral when he was just a child. After the funeral, his mother abandons him, leaving him with his uncle, a martial artist, leaving him alone in that place. Suddenly, Jin Mori's grandfather appears, holding baby Ilpio. Tae-jin gives a book to little Ilpio containing all the secrets of the Taekyon martial art and encourages the child. Returning to the present, the two are attacked by Jugok and his shark ability. However, Ilpio easily stops him and sends him away. After this, we see Han asking the green-haired commissioner to train him to awaken his Chariok. Meanwhile, Mori and Yura are also training to become stronger. Returning home after training, Mori recalls moments with his grandfather. We see Mori asking his grandfather not to leave on his birthday, but Tae-jin needs to run away to keep his grandson safe. It's a very emotional scene. After this sad memory, we have a happy moment. Han and Yura receive a notification on their bracelets informing them that it's Mori's birthday. They go to his house to celebrate, and we see the celebration filled with food and joy. Mori remembers his grandfather's words about making many friends and enjoying the good times with them. They promise each other that they won't lose the tournament. But this is the calm before the storm. The next day, Mori receives a letter at his door. Upon opening it, he finds a photo of his grandfather bound and injured, likely being tortured, accompanied by a chilling warning. We discover that the ones pursuing Mori's grandfather are Nox, the cult behind everything. In the letter Mori received, along with the photo, there was also the location where his grandfather was being held. Mori decides to ride his bike to try and find his grandfather. After the opening, Team Seoul will face Team Jeju. Han and Yura are searching for Mori, as the match is about to start. Since Han is still suspended, even if Mira wins, they will still lose the match because they need 2 victories. The first battle begins with Yura versus Lee Marin. Lee Marin starts the fight bizarrely, taking off his cloak and only wearing underwear in the arena. After this unsettling scene, we see Mori already at the indicated location. He finds his grandfather chained up, with blood on the floor, and unconscious. Back to Yura's battle. Despite her attacks, her opponent is covered in bronze oil, making her strikes difficult to land. Suddenly, the enemy reveals that he has Yura's family sword, which was stolen by the fiancé in episode 3. He reveals that it is no ordinary sword, as it can change shape, a sword that carries the power of the gods. Even without the sword, Yura is not an easy opponent. Returning to Mori and his grandfather, we discover it was a trap. The fake Taejin's body explodes, destroying the entire area. A strange man who caused all this appears. Despite taking an explosion to the face, Mori gets up. The strange man performs a shadow clone jutsu against Mori. Back to Yura's fight, her opponent is part of Nox, who has been after her all along. Now we see Han fighting members of one of the teams. He isn't wasting any time, simply taking down a fighter and moving on to help the opponent she had knocked down. Out of nowhere, the woman gives him a kiss. Returning to Mori, he faces the strange man's clones. The more he defeats, the more clones appear. We discover that the real members of Team Jeju were killed and replaced by other minds. Mori becomes so enraged that he uses his pressure point technique again. For an hour, he feels no pain, fighting without caring about the damage he has already sustained. Returning to Mira's fight, it has turned into a humiliation, with even open-handed slaps to the face. Despite giving her all, she still gets beaten up but doesn't give up. She remembers the promise she made to her friends not to give up on winning. After fainting and experiencing bizarre hallucinations, the cliched awakening happens. Mira awakens something within herself, and the sword that was with her enemy teleports to her, returning to its true owner. Mira awakens her Cheriok, the great hero of legends, Lu Bu, while her enemy's Cheriok is a kraken. After awakening her Cheriok, Yura defeats her opponent with a single strike. However, she used too much energy and, as she falls, is caught by Mori, who arrived just in time for the next match. We see that Mori is furious, to the point that Han notices even from afar. Mori's opponent asks where Peilong, the shadow clone guy, is, but Mori is so enraged that he doesn't even respond and simply kicks his opponent in the face. At the same time as Mori defeats his tournament opponent, we see that he also defeated Peilong in the same manner, filling him with kicks. Using his original technique, the Blue Dragon Kick, Mori realizes it wasn't enough and then reveals a new technique, the Twin Blue Dragon Kicks, a terrifying technique that engulfs his opponent. The episode ends showing how Mori resembles his grandfather, both monsters in the art of kicking. Ilpio's past reveals his motive for fighting. He promised his injured friend, harmed by Jeagle, that he would seek vengeance and help her return to martial arts. Despite his nobility, this is seen as an excessive quest for revenge, revealing a darker side to his motivation. We discover that Nox is behind the competitors, who are much stronger than they should be. The protagonist and the big guy continue their battles, and the protagonist's team faces Park Ilpio's team. The first battle between Han and Sunga begins, with a quick exchange of blows. Han ends up getting dizzy from a hit to the ear, making it easier for Sunga to attack. He recalls the administrator's explanation about Nox and their unique belief in a god who seeks to eliminate all Cheriok users. Determined not to lose the tournament and to gain more information about Nox, Han recovers and wins the fight, incapacitating Sunga. The main leader of Nox starts eliminating the competitors he had modified himself, killing all those who had enhanced powers. A Nox army appears and invokes a colossal attack. Your existence precedes gods, threatening the tournament. The fight between the protagonist and Ilpio begins. The administrator tries to prevent Nox's attack while they face off. Ilpio shows great skill and reveals the protagonist's weaknesses, landing several critical blows. The protagonist, weakened, uses his Twin Dragon's technique to try to regain the advantage. As the battle continues, a Nox monk increases the power of his sword. The protagonist remembers the need to win and uses the technique of the sword without a sword, which helps him neutralize the weaknesses and face Ilpio on equal terms. Meanwhile, outside the arena, a group of musicians starts to play, while a member of the Six tries to intercept Nox's attack. The battle in the arena continues with an intense clash between the protagonist and Ilpio, both fighting with all their might. The protagonist and Ilpio face each other with powerful abilities, and the impact of their blows causes a huge explosion. The Six member finally uses the National Treasure number 1 to neutralize Nox's attack. The fight between the protagonist and Ilpio becomes even more fierce, with both showing their skills to the fullest. At the climax of the battle, Ilpio remembers his promise to the protagonist's grandfather and continues to fight, even as the protagonist appears exhausted. The fight between them continues, with Ilpio transforming and demonstrating impressive power. Ilpio demonstrates that he is the bearer of the Nine-Tails Fox power, an entity that, after being sentenced by God, burned half of the sky and descended to earth, swearing revenge. With the power of the fox, his hair turns white, and he becomes an even greater threat. The protagonist faces Ilpio but struggles against the devastating force of his blows. Ilpio easily knocks him down but shows signs of struggling to control his power. After an intense exchange of blows, Ilpio uses fire wolves to attack the protagonist, causing a massive explosion that destroys part of the ring. Surprisingly, the protagonist manages to overcome Ilpio's power, launching him into the sky and then back into the arena with a colossal strike. Both fighters are perplexed by what ends the match, and Nox halts its attack. The Nox monk disappears, leaving the administrator to deal with the aftermath. In the hospital, Ilpio is congratulated for the battle. The protagonist visits him, and they bicker almost like children about their powers and the protagonist's next step in finding his grandfather. Ilpio encourages the protagonist, assuring him that he will defeat Jiggle. Meanwhile, Jiggle appears in the hospital and kills a maid, merging her body with that of the conductor. He then heads to the floor where Ilpio is, who tries to confront him but is stopped by Jiggle. Jiggle devours more people and creates his own environment within the hospital, expanding his presence and devastating the place. The Nox monk, with white hair and eyes marked by the Omega symbol, opens a gate in the sky, releasing chained creatures. Ilpio continues fighting Jiggle, but with the chaos unfolding, the administrator decides to interrupt the tournament. We proceed with the power of the Nox white guy, who has even released a shadow claiming to be his god, along with all the beings he had summoned. At this moment, the maestro's grandfather vows to avenge him while leaving the hospital. We then see Jiggle's past, where he was taught to win at any cost. This leads to a fierce battle with Ilpio, who, in addition to being strong, now faces Jiggle with immense power. As the battle between Jiggle and Ilpio unfolds, the commissioners begin hunting down all the summoned beings from Nox, eliminating them one by one, while a statue is stopped by the administrator and observed by everyone. The fight between Jiggle and Ilpio continues with Ilpio initially dominating. However, Jiggle starts to show much greater power, managing to take Ilpio's key and revealing that, besides having power, Jiggle is being controlled by a much larger monster. Before Jiggle can obtain the key, one of Nox's beings tries to get it but is stopped by the six, who leave the key with the chief Nox monk. The protagonist prevents the monk from taking the key while Ilpio is incapacitated. The battle between the administrator and Nox is complicated by the United States launching several missiles at Seoul. The administrator redirects them elsewhere, where Han begins to help Ilpio's friends, who start to be healed. Ilpio and the protagonist decide that the protagonist should keep the key so that neither Jiggle nor Nox can obtain it. The battle to stop Nox's summoning becomes increasingly complicated. Meanwhile, Jiggle attacks Han and Mira, who use their abilities to the fullest but still lose to Jiggle. The protagonist faces Jiggle on equal footing. Finally, the statue breaks the administrators and the six beggars' blockade, allowing the protagonist to confront Jiggle. All the citizens of Seoul are teleported out of the attack area. The six-member and Maestro's grandfather launches an arrow capable of piercing through God and reinforces it to end the Nox monk's attack, along with a meteor, Madara style. This destroys all of Seoul, disintegrating the monk and even the area where the protagonist was. Then, the protagonist appears in front of the Nox monk and Jiggle. Jiggle then grabs the key and transforms into a kind of angel/demon. After becoming this kind of being, Jiggle toys with Han, Mira, and the protagonist. However, as soon as he manages to break free from Jiggle's powers, the protagonist begins to use acupuncture to release more of his power. After a devastating blow, Han sacrifices himself to protect the protagonist from the impact. With this, the protagonist unleashes his full power, creating a crown and using his magic staff to face Jiggle. Even facing a difficult battle, the protagonist manages to handle Jiggle's monstrosities, keeping up with him even in speed. At a crucial moment, the protagonist enhances the power of his magic staff, throwing Jiggle away. Moving forward without stopping, the protagonist lands several punches with impressive impact, severely injuring Jiggle. Next, the protagonist creates the golden cloud and fires a golden lightning bolt at Jiggle, repeating the attack until Jiggle is completely defeated, using the power of the monkey god. After the battle, Jiggle transforms into an even larger and completely deformed monster, losing his powers. The protagonist then needs to rely on his friends to face Jiggle's final form. After everyone uses their attacks, the protagonist launches the Dragon Strike, which shatters Jiggle, leaving only a fragment of the key. Next, one of the six appears, proclaiming herself as the progenitor of humanity and the strongest of all beings. With the end of the tournament, she is the one who grants wishes to the winners. The protagonist realizes that asking to bring his grandfather back would be a selfish wish, so he chooses to ask for everyone to be healed, restoring the severed parts of everyone, including Ilpio's cousin, who had a wounded leg. With the wish granted, the progenitor shrinks in size and reveals that the protagonist's grandfather is well and resting peacefully. 3 months later, everyone is resting after so much has happened in such a short time. The protagonist was unconscious for 3 months and discovers that the fragments of the key have been scattered. Additionally, the protagonist's memories were restricted, and he did not know he had the power of the monkey god. Knowing where to go, the three, Mori, Han, and Mira, decide to unite to seek all the protagonist's power. However, his grandfather is imprisoned by Nox, who is plotting something to use him.